So with that in mind, let's get to it. Starting us off in at number 10, Miss Marvel powers. Once upon a time, Rogue permanently absorbed Carol Danvers' psyche and superhuman abilities when Danvers was Miss Marvel. As you can imagine, this screwed around quite a bit with Carol. Essentially, the two minds shared one body, but it gave Rogue a whole new set of abilities, including flight at wickedly fast speeds, the ability to repel bullets, superhuman strength, stamina, durability, reflexes, speed, and a precognitive sense. Damn. Not only did she gain her powers, but she also gained Carol's human Kree physiology, which made her incredibly resistant to most poisons and toxins. Eventually though, Charles Xavier was able to separate the two, but it has left a little bit of tension between Carol and Rogue over the years.
Number 9. Blast immunity. Due to the fact that they share genes and similar powers, Cyclops has blast immunity when it comes to his brother Havoc's blasts. His brother can devastate and obliterate anything he locks onto with his own shockwave-like blasts, which are emitted from his body, often more specifically his hands. Well, that is unless he targets Scott. Alex himself likewise has immunity to Scott's optic blast as well. Well, usually anyways. And to be clear, they can still attack one another, but the damage is simply negligible. It can be easily shrugged off due to their built-up immunity to each other. And when it comes to his own blast, Scott is completely immune. That's how he still manages to have eyelids and can even prevent his eyes from emitting optic blasts when they are closed shut. Though he does still often have to sleep with his ruby quartz visor to be safe. I always like to imagine him with like a ruby quartz like eye mask. I think that would be super cute. Probably never gonna see that in the comics though, might be too cute for Scott. Not for me though. Number 8. Energy blasts. While many get triggered when I use the term laser eyes in videos, the reality is I do it to poke loving fun at the inconsistency of Scott Summers' powers. It's part of his comic book history. We may refer to the energy he emits from his eyes as optic blasts now, but the truth is optic blast was actually a term coined for him after his powers were retconned. Originally, Scott's powers were explained in that his eyes absorbed energy from the sun and that solar energy was actually what created the blast. Hot solar energy. The only thing that could contain this solar energy was ruby quartz. This meant that his powers could be depleted and would sometimes need to be recharged. At one point he even managed to harness lunar energy to use instead, although lunar energy wasn't shown to be quite as effective, not quite as powerful. However, a lot of fellow comic book nerds had some questions regarding Cyclops' powers in terms of how they were supposed to work, and the source for his main ability was changed. Now his eyes would be known as portals to another dimension, overflowing with energy, where the logic of our world's physics did not apply. This made his powers appear more versatile, more limitless, and allowed writers more creative license with them. It also appeased fans, so just kinda weird. I love that like we think that that makes more sense. Oh, they're a portal to another dimension. No, yeah, that's fine, that's fine. Number 7. Visor. Okay, so we all know that Cyclops has a visor, and that his visor helps him flip the switch for his optic blasts. But what you might not know is that when he fires blasts in the comics and you see him clenching his fists, that's not just a flair for the dramatic. That fist clenching also has to do with controlling his powers. Say what? It's true. The controls for his visor are actually inside his gloves. They're comprised of a series of small buttons sensitive to pressure, allowing him to change the size of the opening in the visor and have very precise control over how much damage he wants to inflict, as well as where he wants to target that damage to. This may sound like a silly place to put said buttons. What if you accidentally clenched your fist in frustration? Until you realize this also gives Scott access to his powers even when restrained. Also means he can just take off his gloves and go to sleep with his visor on. So, pretty cool. Tie his hands, he can still use them. Put him to bed, he just takes off his gloves. Useless. Number 6. Superior DNA. Despite having siblings who appear more powerful than him, Mr. Sinister has always had and continues to have an obsession with Scott Summers. Why? Well, he's also obsessed with the whole Summers line, of course, but according to him, Scott is the genetic key to creating the most powerful mutant of all time. This is due to his superior DNA. But what does that mean? Well, I don't know exactly. I'm still waiting for Mr. Sinister's TED Talk on mutant DNA to help explain this whole thing in layman's terms. But for now, we just have to trust the villainous geneticist on this. I mean, I doubt he would have manipulated Scott's entire life on the scale that he has without facts to back up his claim. So he just has superior DNA. He just has it. Some people, they're just born with it. Some people, it's Maybelline. Number 5. Telepathic defense. While we're not always aware of this power for a multitude of heroes, I feel like it has become a secret must-have if you just want to be part of the X-Men team. team. Everyone on the X-Men seems to just have it without our knowledge until it just randomly comes up in the comics. But I guess that's what happens when you work alongside and fight against so many powerful telepaths. Actually, this ability was harnessed and strengthened by Scott through rigorous training with Professor Charles Xavier, and through his close connection to one of the strongest telepaths in the Marvel Universe, Jean Grey, and later his relationship with another accomplished telepath, Emma Frost. Although his telepathic defense didn't protect him from having Jean uncover his psychic affair with Emma Frost. So yeah. Ooh. Feel like that would have been a good time to flex that defense. Feel like, ooh, don't find out. Oh well, she would have found out anyways. He would have told her because he loves her. Number 4. Super Trigonometry. Due to his Danger Room training, Cyclops is insanely skilled when it comes to his optic blasts. I'm sure it's hard enough to just aim using your eyes, as I don't think it would actually be as intuitive as we all think. And even the flick of your eyes to a different direction mid-battle could mess with where you are targeting. You'd also have to be quite focused. Scott is not only skilled when it comes to targeting with his blasts in general, but he can also bounce his optic blast off surfaces, knowing which angles to approach in order to bounce the blast around in a less direct manner, avoiding obstacles and catching his opponents unawares. And in fact, firing his optic blast in a specific direction also requires a lot of control with his visor, as his eyes don't really allow him to focus a blast. It's often depicted that his visor is actually more where specific targeting comes in. I think he's got like panels that allow him to like adjust the angle. Part of this skill is practicality, and part of it is mind math, known as his super trigonometry skills. You do not want to play pool with Cyclops if he's using his blast. He will beat you. He will definitely beat you. Ooh, Hawkeye versus Cyclops in pool, who would win? These are the questions. Number 3. Black Vortex. The Black Vortex is a construct that allows those who possess it to unleash their full cosmic potential. In Cyclops Volume 3, a younger version of Cyclops from the past was working with his dad Corsair and the Starjammers, who were actually tracking the Black Vortex, and Cyclops ended up being imbued by its energy after he and his teammates, young Iceman and Groot, became trapped on the ship where the Vortex was and had to fight their way out. They all decided to submit to the Vortex, and in so doing were granted its cosmic power, becoming the most powerful versions of themselves. Cyclops himself had an awesome suit that appeared to allow him to channel his blast through his eyes, his head, his neck, and his chest. And instead of his visor, he's actually wearing a mask, implying that he has more control over his blast ability. Also, Iceman looks like an ice elf, and it's like super cute and awesome. I just love a good ice elf. Also that hair, he has such nice long hair. Elves are so cute. Number 2. Breaks Adamantium. During the Age of Apocalypse storyline, Cyclops and Wolverine end up on opposite sides of the battle. Cyclops found himself temporarily allied with Apocalypse, and although in falling for the rebel and prisoner Jean Grey felt like he might be switching sides, this all ended up happening not quite fast enough. He came to blows with Logan, known as Weapon X in this alternate timeline, who showed up and fought to free Jean by himself. Unsurprisingly, once again, even in this alternate timeline, Jean was a huge part of these two's dislike for one another, and without the mutual cause of Xavier and the X-Men to unite them, their fight became a brutal one. Cyclops lost an eye and proved the power of his blast when he ended up breaking through Logan's adamantium-coated skeleton, severing his hand. Was it the left hand or the right hand? I feel like in comics, I feel like it was the left hand, but that's some real trivia for you. Tell me which hand it was. Number 1. Spirit Bomb. What's better than optic blasts? Happiness blasts! Yep, Scott one time used his power to channel happy thoughts through his eyeballs in order to stop an alien invasion, with a little help of course from his friends. This was back in the 70s in Volume 1 of Uncanny X-Men. Of course it's from the 70s. A race of aliens known as the Xenox threatened to destroy the Earth using the proximity of their piloted homeworld's gravity, but they had one huge weakness: their fear of positive emotions. Meaning that when Charles Xavier channeled all of Earth's positive thoughts and passed them telepathically onto Jean, who in turn passed them on to Alex Summers, who boosted them with cosmic rays, and passed them on to Cyclops, whose eyes they came out of in a beam of hot and awesome intensity, which was then cooled somewhat by Iceman as the beam made its way straight to the Xenox, the invaders were successfully scared off, defeated. Man, that's a lot of passing. That's like, these guys should play like sports more, I think. They'd be so good at it. And that's how Cyclops' Spirit Bomb ability saved the planet. Sure, he needed help, but geez, what a plot. So yeah, he can use his eyes to channel other things sometimes. Fun fact. Thanks for watching, Nerd Squad. I hope you learned something new about Scott Summers, one of the most iconic X-Men, for good or for bad. Regardless of your opinion of his character, he really is one of the central players when it comes to the X-Men team and many of their storylines. Number 10. Leadership. While he might not be the leader we'd all like for the X-Men, Scott Summers is more often the one that his fellow mutants need. Professor Xavier actually trained Cyclops for the role since day one as a young mutant who had been there since the beginning. So when people ask if he deserves to be a leader, the answer should be an emphatic yes, as he has been training for this role pretty much his entire life. A master tactician, Cyclops usually has his eyes on the bigger picture when it comes to problem solving, meaning sometimes, in order to achieve something good, he can be willing to do something that other heroes might deem as bad or downright dastardly. He kills people. He remade X-Force into a team of child assassins. He became a martyr on purpose, sacrificing himself because he knew the younger mutants needed someone to become their symbol, to rally around. So, while we may not always approve of his actions, the bottom line is Cyclops is still one of the best when it comes to prime leaders in the Marvel universe. While a very different character, he's on like a Captain America level of leadership. And that's like people universally agree to that, so not making that up. I know you're all thinking it. Number 9. Poker Master. Remy's love of cards comes from his thieving background. He grew up stealing and gambling and actually earned quite a bit of money doing so, but more about his wealth another time. As such, he has an insane level of skill as a poker player. We see him beat out his X-Men squad in a friendly tournament in X-Men Volume 2, issue 48. It comes down to him and Sam Guthrie, aka Cannonball, who insisted he'd actually never played before, but actually has been playing poker for years with his siblings before coming to the X-Men. Yeah, I've tried that before, Sam, with Catan, so I know your tricks. And he is actually a bit of a pro himself. But even he is no match for Remy. When it seems like Gambit accidentally charged the cards on purpose to make them explode so he wouldn't have to reveal his full final hand, we find out that although he forfeits, he had the winning hand, and chose to throw the game in favor of Sam, as Storm picks up the remnants of his smoking ace, which would have given him a royal flush to Sam's full house. And if you play poker like I do, you should know, royal flush is like the best you can get. Royal flush. Number 8. Super reflexes and agility. Have you ever noticed how Gambit almost never misses when throwing one of his cards? Or how he almost never gets hit when others are aiming for him? This is because he has superior reflexes and agility. His movements are basically acrobatic. This helps him as a master thief as well, often allowing him to sneak into places and out unnoticed. And it allows him to dodge lasers on a matrix level, and bullets on a matrix level actually as well. He has also been able to avoid getting hit by projectiles himself and save others from getting hit by simply being quick enough to catch them, and often throw them back at the people that aim them at him. Number 7. Bojutsu. When Gambit first made his appearance in Uncanny X-Men Volume 1, issue 266, he actually was not seen using his famous playing cards. Instead, we met Gambit with metal spikes in hand, almost like darts. Like many of his fellow mutants, first appearances can be deceiving, and many of the X-Men needed some time to evolve and settle before becoming the iconic characters we know them as today. I mean, look at how much Beast has changed from his first appearance. And in fact, while we've come to know Gambit for his explosive playing cards, he is also skilled with weapons as well, specifically his bow staff. His accuracy both with his staff and anything he chooses to turn into a projectile is impressive. He rarely misses his targets, and even is accurate and skilled enough to use his staff to deflect bullets, and powerful enough to destroy a danger room bot with one swift blow of his staff. Number 6. SAVATE. Aside from his skill with his staff, Remy LeBeau is also skilled with his hands as well. I mean, his fists. His fists. He is a master of SAVATE. What does that mean? It means that he is a French kickboxing master. What makes French kickboxing different from English kickboxing? Well, I'm not sure. I assume it's similar, but in French? Oui oui, mon chéri. It's actually like standard kickboxing, but it's more graceful. Fun fact. His hits would also be more powerful using this technique, as he has a supercharged metabolism that makes his strikes land with more force. Nick Fury even said that Gambit was one of the best hand-to-hand fighters he had ever seen. Number 5. Hypnotic charm. Have you ever wondered why so many ladies have the hots for Gambit? Well, it could be because of this subtle and sometimes lesser known ability. Remy is charming just on his own, but he also possesses a power known as hypnotic charm. This power allows him to have slight control over another being through the power of suggestion, basically like Cajun Jedi mind tricks. He can suggest something to you that you might be inclined to follow through with or agree with him on. Some have even suggested that he may have used his influence to make Rogue fall for him. However, this power is not particularly strong, so it is unlikely that this theory is true, and more likely that the two just fell in love organically. Because as soon as someone becomes aware of this power, it ceases to work on them any longer. and it's likely that Rogue, after all this time, would both know about Remy's hypnotic and natural charms. Number 4. Mental defense. Gambit's ability to manipulate kinetic energy means that he is almost always surrounded by it, which grants him an electrostatic field. This basically acts like a mental shield and protects him from those who would probe his thoughts. Professor X once likened trying to get into Remy's mind to trying to hold on to a bunch of snakes, and Psylocke has also struggled when it comes to breaking through Gambit's mental defenses. It doesn't help that Gambit also specifically will focus on misleading thoughts when he feels someone trying to make their way into his mind, which only makes attempting to use telepathy on him feel even more impossible and frustrating. Number 3. Healing factor. While this has never been explicitly confirmed, we have seen Gambit both withstand and recover from a number of devastating blows within a short amount of time. It has been suggested that he may be able to harness kinetic energy in order to heal himself, which might also explain in how Bishop's timeline he survived long enough to be an elderly man who remembered the X-Men and was known as the Witness. If he was actually the Witness, that is. That theory has really never been fully confirmed or denied. Number 2. Molecular manipulation. On the alternate Earth of 9921, Gambit becomes New Sun. New Sun is basically Gambit with his powers unlocked to his full potential. This version of him was so powerful he ended up killing his Earth's Phoenix. His kinetic powers far surpass those of his Earth 616 counterpart, to the point that he can manipulate kinetic energy on a molecular level. He could heat up molecules or cool them down, and could stop a person dead in their tracks. And he no longer had to touch objects to make them explode. He could even transform himself into energy, manipulating his own molecules and converting himself into energy waves. Number 1. Toxic conversion. During Gambit's run as Apocalypse's Horseman of Death, Gambit had this power. He agreed to be one of Apocalypse's horsemen, believing that Apocalypse would be the salvation of the mutants, and that if Apocalypse turned on them, that Gambit would be able to stop him. Fortunately, didn't quite work out as Remy had hoped, and he ended up actually attacking his former teammates, the X-Men. As a result of this transformation, he gained the power to transform air into deadly poison, even once threatening to do so to his own master, Apocalypse, after regaining his sense of self and remembering who he truly was. Thanks for watching, Nerd Squad. Are there any powers you feel like we left out? What are some of his powers that you think make Gambit super cool? How do you feel about the fact that Gambit's solo movie project involving Channing Tatum was cancelled? Let us know in the comments below. I personally was looking forward to hearing what a Cajun Channing Tatum would sound like, but I also feel like Gambit is a really hard one to cast. Number 10. Kinetic energy. While some who are less familiar with Gambit just think of him as a man with card tricks, the truth is that he is so much more than that. His power isn't just throwing explosive cards, though it might appear that way to the uninformed eye. Gambit's true powers are to kinetically charge any object that he comes into contact with, setting it to explode on impact or time the explosion. He once charged his gum that he was chewing in his mouth and spat it at an enemy when it seemed that he would otherwise be a goner, with a sword at his throat. Ooh. Guess Gambit is lucky he wasn't in Singapore, where importation and selling of gum is illegal. True facts. While he may seem super in control of these powers, he actually constantly fears that he isn't, and even made a deal with Mr. Sinister to help him have more control over them. Yet in the comics, the control he does demonstrate is pretty impressive, making one wonder what a fully in control Gambit would be capable of. We're getting there, we're getting there.
Shape-shifting. Rogue has absorbed the powers of her adoptive mother Mystique a handful of times. But not for the reasons that you'd expect. While she did gain Mother Dearest's powers, Rogue touching Mystique was for other reasons. She wanted to better understand her mother. Adoptive mother, rather. As you know, Rogue doesn't just absorb abilities, but thoughts, memories, etc. In one case though, outside of the comics, we did get to see Rogue use Mystique's powers. Sort of. In the X-Men the Animated Series, after Rogue had absorbed Carol Danvers and the latter's psyche was becoming the more prominent of the two, she ended up using Mystique's powers to shapeshift into her previous body. You got a complicated past with your mother, so I'm just gonna use your mother's powers to make you look like me. Moving on to number 8. Death. Prior to Rogue being able to control her powers, a lingering touch of hers could be deadly. Typically for those who had superpowers or were powerful mutants, her touch would cause damage and might even put them into a coma. But in the case of someone with a physiology like Carol Danvers, psyches were merged. But what about for a regular human? It's no bueno. Rogue's touch is practically the touch of death. For regular non-powered humans, Rogue's touch could very well be fatal, sucking their strength at an accelerated and alarming rate that our human bodies cannot handle. Moving on to less depressing territory, and at number 7, she can manipulate ice. Wonder whose powers she absorbed to get this little trick. If it wasn't already obvious, this skill set of Rogue's was the byproduct of touching X-Men teammate Bobby Drake, aka Iceman. It's a power that she's borrowed from Bobby on multiple occasions, not only for use in combat but for other means too. Bobby's ice manipulation powers, which might I add are Omega level mutant abilities, allow him to decrease the thermal energy around him in order to create ice structures. His creations will not break unless he wills them to. So you can imagine how this was useful for Rogue in Avengers vs. X-Men, when a whole lot of rebuilding was required after a failed attempt to use the Phoenix Force occurred. Moving on to another X-Men member here in at 6, phasing. Okay, personally Kitty Pryde's phasing powers were always the mutant ability that I wanted growing up, so I am a big fan of this number. In Uncanny X-Men issue 194, the X-Men are almost bested by villain Nimrod when Kitty Pryde has an idea, and it's a good one too. Out for the count and being carried around by Rogue, Kitty decides to push her head up against Rogue's, forcing the mutant to absorb her powers, psyche, thoughts, and memories of her teammate. This spawns a greater plan in which Rogue then absorbs Wolverine, Colossus, and Nightcrawler's powers, using them to attack the sinister robot, smashing it to bits. Although Nimrod ends up rebuilding itself and teleporting away, it's still a pretty big win for the X-Men. Up next, number 5, weather manipulation. Storm is the second Omega level mutant on our list whose powers Rogue has absorbed, and she's another teammate whose powers have been borrowed on more than one occasion. Now, the first wasn't actually borrowed. They were in battle against one another and Rogue was still doing that whole villain thing. She would fight Storm and steal her powers. Guess that kind of stuck with Aurora, because the next time that Rogue would find herself borrowing the weather manipulator's abilities was when Storm had to offer her powers willingly to Rogue in Uncanny X-Men issue 185. But it wasn't for combat, and it wasn't used the way that Rogue used Bobby's powers. Instead, it was in order to give Rogue a new perspective, opening the young mutant up to trusting Storm and seeing the beauty that the Earth had to offer, versus Rogue's prior cynically inclined outlook. It brought them closer together. Moving on to number 4, reality warping. So Scarlet Witch is arguably one of the most powerful superheroes in the Marvel Universe, albeit being slightly unstable at times. Rogue has stolen her powers on a few occasions, but perhaps the most memorable one took place in Uncanny Avengers issue 2, volume 2. After absorbing Wanda's powers, Rogue had some trouble with it, the power being what she called a, I quote, confusing idiot power. She was unable to make use of the abilities right from the get-go, and she couldn't control it either. Nothing actually happens with these powers aside from her hands glowing. Why? Well, Wanda explains it as Rogue lacking the imagination to use her reality warping powers. Kinda savage, but does make sense. Up next at 3, physical trait absorption. We mentioned this ability in our intro, but we want to talk about the extent of this power of Rogue's, because often it's entirely involuntary. During the comic Fantastic Four vs. the X-Men issue 4, Rogue absorbs the Human Torch's powers. Now this doesn't only give her pyrokinesis, it gives her his fiery form that allows her to fly. While Rogue does make use of this for a brief period of time, she notes that this fire form completely obliterated her outfit, which was not fireproof. She could not control that. Sue Storm ends up using her powers to create a force field around Rogue, snuffing her out and leaving her completely naked. It's a bit of a distant shot of her naked though, so. Another time Rogue has absorbed a physical trait was when she absorbed Nightcrawler's powers on an alternate Earth. Earth 161. In this case, Rogue's powers did something a little unconventional. She ended up switching powers and appearance entirely with Kurt, which gave her blue skin and a tail, along with his abilities. This did not go over too well with Rogue. She kinda resented it. Up next, number 2, Rogue God of Thunder. Once upon a time, Rogue smushed her hand into Thor's face and stole his powers. I love the drawing in this panel. This was back in Rogue's more villainous early days, specifically in Avengers Annual Issue 10 when she faced off against Earth's mightiest heroes. Thor swoops Rogue off her feet, declaring he, I quote, knowest not who thou art. What follows is Rogue metaphorically slapping him, stating her name, and saying that he had her eternal gratitude for handing her victory on the proverbial silver platter, because she stole his powers and was about to whoop everyone. Oh, Thor. Sometimes his naivety is wonderfully endearing. And finally, in at number 1, she can recall past powers. In X-Men Volume 2, issue 107 from 2000, Rogue's powers mutated further. Not on their own though. This was due to an induced mutation by a telepathic mutant Skrull named Zakon. Now think of her as the Skrull equivalent of Charles Xavier. While it was not intentional, Zakon actually attempted to activate Rogue's powers to evade bounty hunters, the side effects allowed for Rogue to recall previously absorbed powers. And because of this, Rogue found herself having difficulty controlling which powers manifested when, occasionally boasting Wolverine's claws and Cyclops' optic blasts. This was temporary though. Alright, there we have it friends, what are your thoughts and feels about Rogue?